My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary-Egmont. This afternoon, after question period, the House will begin to discuss some of the bills which have been introduced to the House by the government. At the moment, there are 20 bills which are available for second reading. Second reading is supposed to deal with the principle of the bills rather than to get into all of the fine details of the legislation as proposed. Later in this week, the House will begin the estimates in Heritage Savings Trust Fund, and this will go on for a period of time. All in all, the House is making good progress and should rise somewhere in the middle to the latter part of June.
Let us pray. At the beginning of this week, we ask you, Father, to renew and strengthen in us the awareness of our duty and privilege as members of this legislature. We ask you also, in your divine providence, to bless and protect the Assembly and the province we are elected to serve. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased today to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly a distinguished visitor to our province who is seated in your gallery today. Our guest today is making his first official visit to Canada, to Alberta, having been named as Ambassador to Canada from the West African country of Togo. He is accompanied by the Honorary Consul of Togo, Mr. Gary Tarrant of Calgary, and I would ask that they receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill number 32, the Appropriation Act 1988. This is a money bill. Her Honor, the Honourable Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of the contents of this bill, recommends the same to the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, this bill, Bill number 32, provides for the appropriation of dollars to operate the government for the year ended March 31st, 1988. The 25 days of debate on the estimates has been completed, and we're asking the Assembly to approve the expenditures in the amount of $10,019,802,191.
The Honourable Provincial Treasurer has moved first reading of Bill 32, Appropriation Act 1988. Those members willing to give consent to first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 32, Appropriation Act 1988, introduced by the Honourable Mr. Johnston, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start with the first of two introductions today. I'd like to introduce to you and to the members of the Assembly this afternoon some 55 students who are from Sackcloth School in the grade 6 class in the lovely riding of Edmonton Millwoods. They're accompanied today by their teachers Donna Hamilton and Paul Aman. I'd ask them to rise now and receive the very warm welcome of the House. introduction, Mr. Speaker. Today, I'd like to introduce to you and to the other members of the Assembly Ms. Carmen Gloria Quintana. Ms. Quintana is a young woman from Chile who is presently living in Montreal, who has won human rights recognition all around the world for her struggle for freedom and democracy in her home country. Ms. Quintana was a university student on July the 2nd, 1986, when she was participating in a demonstration against the dictatorship, and that time soldiers poured gasoline on her and a friend of hers, Rodrigo Rojas, and burned them alive. Fortunately, Carmen Gloria survived, although Rodrigo died, and she is here in Edmonton, invited by the Pablo Neruda Cultural Center, helping Canadians to better understand the situation of human rights and freedoms in Chile. I'd like to ask Ms. Quintana to stand now and receive the very warm welcome of the House.
Monsieur le Président, Mr. Speaker, je suis fier aujourd'hui d'introduire 56 élèves grade 9 de l'école Marguerite-Douville for Monsieur Brian Strong, député de Saint-Albert. I'm pleased to introduce 56 students, grade 9 student from École Marguerite-Douville of St. Albert on behalf of the member for St. Albert, Brian Strong. And they are accompanied today by teachers Michelle Knoll, Denise Vandenbosch, Aurel Roderick, Barbara Fisher, and Jacqueline Roderick, and parents Gary Knorr. Would they all please stand and receive the warm welcome from this assembly?
Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I have the privilege today to introduce to you and members of the Assembly, on behalf of Honourable Shirley Cripps, a member from Drayton Valley, a group of 28 students from Kelmer High School, a grade 10 class. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Pond, and parents, Mrs. Cordell and Mr. Olenek. I ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, there's a pattern emerging in the government's new Labour Code, and that pattern, Mr. Speaker, is very clearly that they're tipping the balance in favor of management. This latest flaw that I want to talk about today is no exception, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister of Labour is, why is the government requiring each and every trade union in the province to make application to the Labour Relations Board to keep its certificate?
Mr. Speaker, the intention of those consequential amendments is an attempt to have everything that is underway at the time of proclamation of the new Labour legislation, to have all of those items bridged under the current legislation so that there will not be a difficulty of changing the legislation in midstream. In relation to the ongoing certification of those unions where there is a collective agreement or a bargaining relationship, the intention is that that certification will be bridged as well. I am aware of some difficulties with the wording that is in Bill 22, and if those difficulties cause what the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is concerned about, if they are verified, then certainly the wording will be changed to make sure that the legislation is in accord with what the government wishes.
Well, supplementary question. If we're worried about changes, the Labour Act, as the Minister is well aware, said a trade union certified as a bargaining agent under the former Act shall be deemed to be a certified bargaining agent under this Act. My question is simple. Why the change?
Right on.
If the Honourable Leader reads further on in that subsection, he will see that the Labour Relations Board shall issue a new certificate. That means that they will have to. The difficulty is a little earlier in the section where it may give the indication that the trade union, where there is an existing collective agreement or bargaining relationship, will have to apply for that certification, and that was not the intention of the government.
Well, supplementary, I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Speaker, and this is why we have these debates, coming back to the previous one, so we can help out the government. Then is the minister saying that Section 3 will be changed when this bill is brought forward to the House?
Mr. Speaker, we don't always need the assistance, however well-intentioned, of the opposition, and we were aware of this difficulty and had already indicated that it would be corrected.
Well, supplementary question then, saying that we're going to, just to make it clear then, is the minister saying then that all the trade unions that are now certified under the previous Act of 1980 will be automatically certified after this bill becomes law?
Certainly, Mr. Speaker, all of those where there is a collective agreement in place and all of those where there is a bargaining relationship. Now, it is true, as the Honourable Leader well knows, that there are some extinct certifications where in actual fact there is no relationship because the employer is no longer in business, or indeed in some cases where the trade union has disappeared. We have other provisions that will allow the Labour Relations Board to deal with those, and it is not the intention to use this mechanism to dispose of those extinct certifications. The difficulty with those ones is that there is nobody to initiate the decertification process to get them off the records of the Labour Relations Board. Those will be dealt with otherwise, but as far as those where there is a bona fide relationship, the intention is that those will be bridged to the new legislation without any applications.
Supplementary, Edmonton Goldbar.
Well, Mr. Speaker, then, just to be clear to the minister, is it the intention that those who do not have what is considered to be a bona fide relationship will then have to apply for certification under the terms of the new Act? Is that what's intended, Mr. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, to repeat, where there is a collective agreement, where there is a bargaining relationship and there is not currently a collective agreement, those certifications will be bridged to the new legislation. The difficulty exists with some existing certifications where the employer no longer exists, where the union no longer exists, or where there is, for some considerable period of time, no collective bargaining relationship. And there are a lot of certifications like that on the books of the Labour Relations Board, and we have to have some mechanism for removing them. But that will not affect those where there is a bargaining relationship and where they currently have got a certification.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this government, which purports to be so concerned about preventative health care, finally reinsured sterilization procedures after they had claimed that they had listened to Albertans, and we were told also after they saved several million dollars from Alberta health care. We're not sure which came first. How much more listening to Albertans does the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care still need to do before he reinsures basic eye exams for all Albertans of all ages?
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the honourable members would repeat the question. I'm not exactly sure what he's getting at.
Come on.
I'm asking the Minister, Mr. Speaker, how much more listening to Albertans he needs to do before he reinsures basic eye exams for Albertans between the ages of 19 and 64 years of age.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I've answered that question so many times in this legislature but I will repeat myself, and it's simply this. We are not making any plans for any reductions in services provided by the health care insurance plan through the coming year, and members already know that we have maintained premiums at the level they're at now. I have said on numerous occasions we still have under consideration the possibility of some increases in services to our citizens through the health care insurance plan. Not unlike what has occurred in this House numerous times during the last 2 years. The opposition will hear about it when we've made a decision and not before.
Well, we've heard a few other things too, Mr. Speaker. To the Premier, will the Premier open the eyes and ears of the Minister and tell him, as he told to Dr. David Pinault, that de-insuring eye exams was, quote, probably a big mistake, unquote?
Mr. Speaker, in the course of meeting with many Albertans, I'm not sure where I met with Dr. Pinot, but I was checking my records and may have had an opportunity to meet him when I spend days at my constituency office meeting with constituents on a regular basis. But in any event, I do not recall the conversation going along the lines that has now been quoted by the honourable member, and he once again performs in the style that he has established in the House that normally incorrect. I have met with members of the Optometric Association and citizens of Alberta who have expressed to me comments about various matters that are insured by our healthcare system. And I have always told them that we will look at them individually, and we will consider whether the points they're making are valid. And if they are valid, then we'll adjust to them. But I confirm also what the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care said today, and has said many times in the past, and that is, if there are any changes or additions to that plan, they will be announced when the decision is made.
Well, Mr. Speaker, then is the Premier denying that de-insuring eye exams was making a big mistake?
Mr. Speaker, it's always a matter of judgment in people's minds. I did not say it to the person that he has quoted. For my part, I don't know. As I said in the House I think it was Friday, but it might have been Thursday, that one of the things that is important to do with our superb medical system that we have and health system in this province is to make sure that that system is the best that we possibly can have, but within the means of the people, the taxpayers of Alberta, to pay. And anybody in Canada who is looking into the future at all with any sense of responsibility knows that the growth in the healthcare costs in this country are going faster than taxpayers can afford to support into the future. And at some point the lines cross and the system would no longer be able to maintain. Therefore, initiatives have to be taken. And the government has to try certain things to see whether we can't in some way restrain that growth, whether it be by the Heinemann Commission on long-term care for Albertans, the member from Calgary Glenmore's report, other matters. And I would hope that all members of this House would take some time to think about the problem that's coming up in the future, rather than just following along with the old spend, spend, spend theory that they have.
Mr. Speaker, it's the government's build facilities that's at question here. We're going to talk about eye exams, which is 0.1% of the $3.3 billion budget. So is the Premier then saying, Mr. Speaker, that despite oil and gas prices going up and the lottery doing well and other savings being accrued, that it's still a big mistake to have de-insured eye exams, which is so grossly unfair and has no preventative sense to it for so many Albertans between the ages of 19 and 64?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've really dealt with the answer to his question already. He refers to build. I am familiar with the NDP position. They do not like hospitals in rural Alberta. I'm familiar with the member for Millwood's argument that he does not support the Grant MacEwan College expansion, and that they really don't like the building of facilities that are needed for the people of Alberta. I'm familiar with those positions. I'm very pleased to take them to the people of Alberta and explain it to them.
Glad to do that.
Okay, Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are taking time to the Premier to review. We just wish you people would listen. Mr. Speaker, my supplementaries to the Minister. Has the Minister put in place any ongoing research on the consequences of this short-sighted decision? Excuse the pun, Mr. Speaker. Research on the costs, the added costs that will accrue to the healthcare system when other solutions are used, and research into what is happening to preventive eye care.
Mr. Speaker, the best advice that I can give the honourable member is that the Ophthalmologist Society of Alberta, which is the professional group in the Alberta Medical Association who provide eye care in our province as far as the medical profession is concerned have indicated to me that they in fact are able now to see people in urgent need of eye care at a much faster pace than they did previously when the province was paying for the eye care for everyone. And in that regard, they actually regard the decisions we made as an improvement in the medical eye care of the average Albertan, simply because the 60 ophthalmologists in Alberta are able to concentrate on urgent eye care that people require rather than responding to an annual eye examination, which they indicate is not necessary between the ages of 18 and 65 more than every 2 or 3 years.
Clover Bar, followed by Calgary Glenmore.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister, we well know that when a program is going to be de-insured, that there's going to be a peaking as of the utilization rate and then it levels off. My question to the Minister is, does he have any statistics to indicate what level of utilization has occurred since the program was de-insured? Are there any statistics to indicate what has happened to that level of participation?
Mr. Speaker, we can't keep the information in that regard because the group between 19 and 65 who are de-insured, of course, no longer appear in the health care insurance plan records. So all that I can go by is what what advice I'm provided with from individual optometrists or ophthalmologists or their 2 associations. And it's apparent that there was a large increase in utilization during the period from May 26th last year when we announced the de-insurance would be effective August 1. During that period of a little over 2 months, there was a very large increase in utilization, and then there was a very large decrease in the months that followed that. And I'm given to understand now that there is a gradual increase again back toward previous levels, although it certainly hasn't achieved that utilization yet.
Calgary Glenmore, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, has the Minister ever received any indication from Albertans that there is, in fact, a hardship in paying for this procedure once a year?
Mr. Chairman, we do get letters from individuals expressing concern about having to pay for the standard eye examination, but the individual letters are very infrequent now. There are still a number that are coming forward that are form letters that are provided by optometrists in their offices.
Westlock Sturgeon, main question.
Mr. Speaker, main questions to the Premier today. And remains an element, Mr. Speaker, in the minds of many Albertans, a certain amount of uncertainty about the appropriateness of the Premier's returning home from California on a Nova jet a few weeks ago. I have no intention of going into any details on anything, Mr. Speaker, but the Premier did say April 11th in Hansard, page 326. In this case, I had commercial passage there and back. To help put the matter at rest for many that find this matter a bit unsettling, Mr. Premier, would you be willing to table as evidence of this purchase of that ticket in the House?
Did I take it from his question, Mr. Speaker, that he would like me to show the tickets that I had, the to and from California? Is that the one? Oh, yes, I will, Mr. Speaker, show it to him personally, but that's a funny question. From a grown-up, for God's sake.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I think there's many people in Alberta that are very concerned about Premier maybe compromising himself a bit. I'm quite surprised. Doesn't he think his sincerity is going to be questioned if he is not able to table the tickets that he said he had purchased?
Come on.
Mr. Speaker, I have them and I'll show them to him. Frankly, the idea of being compromised, Mr. Speaker, just thinking quickly and looking about the House, I don't think there's a member in this legislature who, if they had an emergency need for assistance and help, and were given that help, would in any way, one of them, and I'm looking now not so much at my own caucus, at other caucuses here, I would not expect any one of them to feel a conflict or a compromise. I would think they would be better people than that, and I know them enough that they would be. And so I wonder, Mr. Speaker, at the line of questioning of the member.
Mr. Speaker, every elected member is diminished by actions such as this. It's not the question. We're not questioning what the emergency was, Mr. Speaker. I just feel that if I took a free gift for someone, I would have...
Order, please. Order, please. Order. With respect to references in Beauchesne, the minister is really responsible for matters that come within his jurisdiction, and the matter this issue has raised before as well as now deals more with the personal dealings of the individual member. And so perhaps the member for Westlock Sturgeon could get to the point with respect to some other supplementaries instead of this.
It's my final supplementary, isn't it, Mr. Speaker? Is this my final? Pardon? Well, it just depends whether you consider interrupting the other one, my third one, or is this the final?
One more interruption like that, honourable member, perhaps will go on to Clover Bar. Please.
Mr. Speaker, you're touchy today, touchy. Mr. Speaker, then, to the Premier, can, because of Nova's largesse, is he going to absent himself from voting on whether Nova gets an ethane policy or whether Nova's affiliate, Husky, gets access to government funds to build Upgrader? Is he going to absent himself because of what he's compromised himself to do here?
He answered that.
Mr. Speaker, I've already answered that question, and I make the point again that even the honourable member, I would not anticipate, or any other member in this House, if they received a measure of help when they really needed help, that any one of them would then feel that somehow they were unable to be in a still handle their responsibilities, either in the legislature or in government, in a way that would not compromise their positions. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I make it very clear to the honourable member I'm going to continue to fulfill my responsibilities on those very issues.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Does not the Premier think it is necessary now at this late date to establish a policy not only of what kind of free transportation and perks a cabinet member can accept from someone doing business with the government, but also whether or not that cabinet minister can vote on affairs that are coming up involving grants to that corporation, granting the favour?
In a cab to the airport?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, I don't in any way consider it a perk, the kind of problem I was dealing with, but besides that, Mr. Speaker, I will not only not stop them, I will fight for their right to be helped when they need it like that.
Member for Clover Bar, main question.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Transportation, and first of all, I'd like to say that I strongly support the program of the highways being cleaned up by our young people, but I have some concerns, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. First of all, can the Minister report to the legislature and indicate the success of the cleanup, and secondly, but I can ask that as a supplementary, can the Minister indicate to us how the program went last weekend?
Mr. Speaker, it's a little early to have the exact details of what took place yesterday because I'm not aware of whether rain caused some delays and that there may well be a need for the use of next Saturday, May the 14th. When we did announce it, we had the 7th this past Saturday as the day, and if there was a need for inclement weather or whatever the case, it would be an alternate next Saturday. I do expect to have the actual figures of the amount of garbage picked up, and to my knowledge, everything went well over the weekend.
Speaker, in this day and age when you get sued for just about anything, if anything wayward happens, can the Minister indicate if we have a liability policy in place in case one of the youngsters are hurt while they are picking up along the side of the road?
Yes, we do have one in place for those who are the young children who are picking up, be they JFW, 4-H, school students, as well as the supervisors.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister indicate if it's been a change in policy? I know when the youngsters pick up the litter along the side of the highway, there's usually a highways truck coming along fairly soon after. Has there been a change in policy or were there trucks not available throughout the whole province to pick up the litter that was being assembled by the youngsters?
To my understanding, Mr. Speaker, the garbage that was gathered by the young people was picked up by members of the department. In some cases, right as they were doing it in some of the areas, where the one where I happened to be at, they were picking it up as they put it on the edge of the road. Some were a little later, a couple of hours later, with the trucks coming back to serve other areas.
A final supplementary to the Minister. Has the Minister had any report of any near misses on the highway, or were the youngsters completely safe and there were no near misses?
As I said, Mr. Speaker, all the reports I have to date is that the weekend went well on this past Saturday and that there were no concerns raised with me, although I'll have a final report a little later in the week.
Main question, Calgary North Hill, followed by Edmonton Millwoods, Calgary Buffalo, Calgary McCall, Edmonton Belmont, Edmonton Beverly, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Thursday and Friday of last week, a national conference was held on Senate reform in this city, and I understand that the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs attended and participated. I would like to ask the Minister if he had an opportunity to meet with Senator Murray to determine the federal government's position on Senate reform, and particularly with respect to the Triple E proposal.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I did on Thursday evening have the opportunity of meeting with Senator Murray, who's the Federal Minister of State responsible for federal and provincial relations. Senator Murray, in our private meeting and again publicly at the inauguration of the Centre for Constitutional Reform at the University of Alberta Law faculty, indicated that the Senate reform proposals that are being considered by the federal government at the present time are in formulation, but in any event, the federal government is prepared as we enter into this next round of constitutional discussions to agree to an elected Senate. That is a very major step forward towards our goal of Triple E. He also indicated clearly that he felt that the Senate must be effective in terms of representing the interests of the Federation, and that is the federal state, which of course is something we have been seeking. But he did not go the whole distance in agreeing towards, agreeing with our proposal for an equal Senate representing equal number of senators from each province. But he certainly did not close the door on that proposal and said that it was something that we should be discussing very carefully in this next round of constitutional discussions. So I, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, was pleased at the progress we were able to achieve, and there's no question Alberta has taken a lead role in this initiative.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. In view of the fact that the Meech Lake Accord has not yet been ratified by all provinces, is there a possibility of an alternative proposal being pursued by the federal government in concert with some other provinces to the detriment of the Triple E proposal?
Mr. Speaker, at the present time, the answer to that question is no. I have had no indication that that might be done. The federal government, of course, is proceeding with the objective of having the Meech Lake Constitutional Accord of last year ratified within the federal parliament now, and as honourable members are aware, is back to the House of Commons again for review, and by all the provinces as well. If that is not successful, of course, and I am an optimist that it can be achieved within the time limit, we would then proceed as the Meech Lake Accord requires, with a series of constitutional conferences with Senate reform at the top of the list. And I would remind the members of the Assembly, Mr. Speaker, that that next priority for constitutional reform is there because of Alberta's leadership role and that of our Premier in the Premier's Conference, which was held here in the fall of 1986.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Since it is the Meech Lake Accord itself that builds Senate reform as a constitutional requirement. Can we anticipate any First Minister's meetings on Senate reform in the absence of the Meech Lake ratification?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is certainly the view of this government, that there is a political accord in existence as part of the Meech Lake Accord, and that is that there will be a meeting before the end of this year at which Senate reform will be the #1 constitutional priority. As a result of that, Senator Murray agreed, and I have agreed, that we will commence a process of discussing that matter of the proposals for Senate reform with other provinces. And the first opportunity for that, of course, will be when our Premier has the opportunity later this month of meeting with the Western Premiers in Parksville, British Columbia. And from then on, to discuss it with other provinces, and I will be meeting with the Ministers of Justice before the end of this month in Quebec City, when it will be possible to begin the discussions relative to what other provinces' proposals might be, and to build upon the support that we already have from the provinces for meaningful Senate reform.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Are there any further steps which the Minister plans for the immediate future, other than the ones he's mentioned, to further the interests of Senate reform and the Triple E in particular?
Well, as I've indicated, there are these immediate opportunities which present themselves for meaningful discussion with the other provinces, and those will be pursued. There are, of course, some provinces which will not be represented at either of the two meetings that I've mentioned, and it will be my intention to visit those provinces and meet with the constitutional ministers. They aren't all the same in each province, Mr. Speaker, and to have one-on-one meetings with those other provinces that I'm not able to be in personal touch with before the end of this month. So that I would hope to be able to accomplish before the end of June, but that of course depends upon our legislative timetable here. But it will be a very major priority for our government in the months ahead.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear to observers across the country that Meech Lake is in jeopardy, certainly with the New Brunswick government now in Manitoba. My question to the Minister, was there any discussion with Senator Murray about a contingency plan to deal with the probability of Meech Lake being overturned?
The Leader of the Opposition has asked a quite an important question because of some degree of uncertainty which has arisen as a result of the situation with regard to New Brunswick, where there is a new government. Certainly it is the intention of the federal government, as it will be when the premiers meet in Saskatoon in August, to pursue that issue with the Premier of New Brunswick on the direct basis. And by that time it is anticipated that perhaps all but Manitoba and New Brunswick will have ratified the accord. I should remind the Honourable Leader of the Opposition that the former Premier of Manitoba and the Premier of Manitoba as of today, the Honourable Gary Filmon, will have supported the Meech Lake approach, and the threat by the Leader of the Opposition in Manitoba now, unless the New Democratic Party opposition repudiates the signature of their former Premier on this accord, could very well pass through the Manitoba legislature, and in so doing perhaps prove that there is a government in place and that the Leader of the Liberal opposition is not in place, in effect, to destroy the work that has been carried on by the previous government and the incoming government.
Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
The Speaker, supplementary is to the Premier on Senate reform. We can still elect our senators even if we do not have Meech Lake, Mr. Premier, and you did suggest that we could elect our premiers. Is the Premier considering holding an election for Alberta's first elected Senate at the same time the next federal election is held?
We're considering a variety of options, Mr. Speaker.
Edmonton Millwoods, then Calgary Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, my questions today are to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. Recently, the people of this province have seen reports, including the excellent investigative journalism done by the Calgary Herald, as well as others, of exploitation of immigrant workers in this province, including firms that have received grants, wage subsidy grants, from his department. And these appalling situations have been known, apparently, to this government since 1985 in a report at which they were censored out because they were too embarrassing. But I'd like to ask the minister simply this: how much longer is he going to be doling out taxpayers' money to scuzzball employers that exploit their workers before he implements some monitoring mechanism to deal with this?
With regard to parliamentary language, perhaps the member next time wouldn't bother to use that one phrase that was put in. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our programs in the department, particularly in my vote that's dealing with job creation, are to enhance and facilitate recent work experience, and so that individuals can get particular skills through particular jobs. I can assure the honourable member in this assembly that if there are abuses of those programs brought to my attention or through our investigations and follow-ups, that the terms of the contract call for all of the dollars to be returned, and in some cases we have the ability to pursue them through legal means. If they're brought to my attention or the department's attention, Mr. Speaker, we do pursue them on on those grounds.
I'll be looking forward to seeing those prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, but let me ask him this. Since it's widely known that women often face double exploitation, new immigrant women to our province, can the minister advise the House when he's going to rectify his gross mistake of not putting a single woman on his Immigration Advisory Services Committee?
Firstly, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is shirking his responsibility as a citizen of Alberta if he is aware of instances where there are people being exploited on the job site, and if he knows of some, I suggest that he bring them forward immediately, because it's unacceptable that he would not report abuses that he's familiar with. Now, Mr. Speaker, if he is simply globalizing, then that's another matter, and grandstanding, then I don't think I'll respond to it. With regard to the Immigration and Settlement Services Advisory Committee, Mr. Speaker, I have been working with the Minister responsible for women's issues for some months now on that committee, and we have recommendations. We've called for recommendations. I don't recall seeing a recommendation from the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, but in any case, we'll be appointing those through order in council in the near term.
Hopefully there'll be somebody other than orange and blue card holders. But let me just ask the Minister of Labour a question here on this, Mr. Speaker, because it applies to the whole area of employment standards, and given this minister's penchant to dismiss employment standards officers who like to enforce the law, could that minister tell us how many instances of exploitation have to be brought forward before he starts prosecuting employers who thumb their noses and defy the labour standards of this province?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is addressing an interesting point which is addressed in Bill 21, and that is the ignorance of the current requirements of the Employment Standards Act and the regulations thereunder. And if the honourable member looks, he will find in Bill 21 the provision for the wide dissemination in the future. In view of that, I will appreciate his support when we get to Bill 21.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the Premier, to the Leader of this government in this province. Seeing as how the Premier has made numerous statements in the House about the value of the province's multicultural heritage, I would like to ask him if he'd be willing to stand in his place and give a personal commitment today to bring all the resources of the government to bear to get some prosecutions of these unscrupulous employers who exploit their new immigrant workers.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. But at the same time, I would also reiterate the challenge from the Minister of Career Development and Employment to the honourable member, who has now made several charges which I think he ought to substantiate.
Calgary Buffalo.
Yes, this is to the Minister of Labour, perhaps to be supplemented by the Minister of Career Development. The Minister of Career Development has spoken about a big investigation of this matter by his Immigrant Advisory Committee, and I'm wondering whether the minister will undertake to this House to have an investigation of this disgraceful situation, and in the meantime to ensure that employees are protected by stricter enforcement, by programs of informing employees and employers of their rights and obligations, and by implementing spot checks where information indicates that those would be helpful.
Mr. Speaker, as a result of the ongoing function of the department, all of the instances that have been discussed are currently under investigation.
I've been asked to supplement the question by the member for Calgary-Buffalo, and let me say that that with regard to the story in the Calgary Herald, I did take the time on the weekend to talk to the chairman of the Immigration and Settlement Services Advisory Committee, who has met with all of the immigration and settlement agencies, non-government organizations throughout the province. He indicates to me that during none of those meetings had worker exploitation come to his attention of immigrants. I talked to Eric Lazo, a member of the Human Rights Commission, Mr. Speaker. He indicated that in his tenure, it has not come to his attention in a formalized manner. And I should also say that I've talked to the Premier's representative in Calgary to deal with ethnic matters, and it has not come to his attention. I do find it interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the very gentleman that is bringing up this question is also the gentleman that opposes broader roles for the provinces in immigration matters in this country. And I think his credibility is exposed by even bringing this to the attention of this Assembly, Mr. Speaker.
Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Calgary McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over 400 Fijian refugee families have come to Alberta and are currently awaiting federal review to determine their refugee status. Until such time as they receive this review, they cannot receive a work permit, and the review process is being delayed as much as 1 year or more. In the interim, many of these people are on welfare in this province, despite the fact that they want to work, and they do not have the opportunity to contribute to Alberta in the way that they would like. To the Minister of Social Services, can she please tell us how much it is costing the province to support these people on welfare, despite the fact that they would like to work very much?
Mr. Speaker, I think that's a question appropriate to the order paper.
Is the Minister of Career Development and Employment aware that we are spending provincial welfare money on people who would like to work because the federal government is unable to deal quickly with the legitimate concerns of these people?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this particular matter is certainly under the jurisdiction of the federal government, and as he may want to talk to his colleague from Calgary-Buffalo, because this is where the line of distinction comes between areas of responsibility. We do not believe that that the provincial government should have jurisdiction in the area of refugees and matters per se with regard to the strict tenets of immigration. However, Mr. Speaker, if there is some way that I could assist the individuals that the member is talking about, I'd certainly be willing to take it up with the Regional Director of Canada Employment and Immigration or directly with the Minister, Mrs. McDougall.
Is the Minister then saying that he is unaware that this kind of circumstances occurs in Alberta on a continuing basis? And is he making a commitment now to take it up with the federal government on behalf of these people and on behalf of making this process work more effectively now and in the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, matters of immigration are very detailed. The Act is very complex in many instances, and that's why, in fact, the federal government is reviewing it and making some revisions. I cannot respond on a broad brush basis to the question by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark. If I can look at the specific case and look into it, I'd be pleased to do whatever I could to assist the individuals he's referring to.
Is the Minister saying that he does not look into this kind of matter on an ongoing basis, that he is not working with the federal government on an ongoing basis in an area of immigration policy which affects Alberta cost-wise, which affects the livelihood of Albertans, people who are in Alberta now, who want to work in Alberta, and who will become citizens of this province as soon as they possibly can? Is he just letting this go and slide as he does so many other?
Honourable Member, we've now had 3 questions in this supplementary.
No, I cannot say that, Mr. Speaker.
Queued. Edmonton Centre, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Hospitals and Medical
care ensure that these refugee claimants from Fiji, as well as all refugee claimants in the province of Alberta, will receive, as they do in other provinces, full coverage under Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan?
Mr. Speaker, persons who are refugees until they have gained permanent status as landed immigrants from the Government of Canada do not qualify for full coverage by Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan. On the other hand, if people who are in that category are destitute and unable to provide any medical care for themselves, they have the same right, as I understand it, as any other resident of Alberta would have to make application to the Minister of Social Services in that department for assistance.
Thank you. Member for Calgary-McCall, followed by Edmonton-Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct a inquiry to the Minister of Labour. As we know, over the last number of weeks, there has been an endeavour to negotiate a general agreement between various trades and contractors. I'd like the Minister to advise us when is something going to happen with the negotiations presently ongoing in the construction industry to develop this general agreement for the trades.
Mr. Speaker, I'm aware of the honourable member for McCall's interest in this in view of the constituency he represents and some of his constituents. The difficulty is that a system was given to the construction industry that both sides had bought into for negotiating an overall settlement. That has not been very successful, but under provisions that I discussed with the industry some weeks ago, certain trades have gone off on sidebar bargaining, and indeed this weekend the Boilermakers have achieved a memorandum of agreement.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, what effect will this memorandum have on the negotiations with the other trades?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, there are two factors here. First of all, the Boilermakers are a trade which is, in the vast majority of cases, in the industrial sector of the construction industry. The memorandum of agreement is really in relation to that sector of the industry rather than the commercial institutional sector or the housing sector. For that reason, it could well act as a basis for the other trades in the industrial sector of the industry. Whether that would spill over to the commercial institutional sector is at the moment not known.
Time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Calgary-McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Labour again, is the Minister suggesting he has abandoned the concept of a master agreement for the whole commercial, institutional, industrial part of the construction industry?
Mr. Speaker, after the discussions of a year ago, which led to the proclamation of Bill 53, I myself consider there are tremendous long-term advantages to the construction industry of having a master agreement for all the different trades province-wide. The difficulty is that the parties do not themselves seem to have a commitment to that process, and I think the government has to recognise those realities. The difficulty, Mr. Speaker, is that the two parties, on the part of the contractors, their bargaining agent, the CLR, Construction Labour Relations, have been remarkably successful at putting items on the table which are completely unacceptable to the Building Trades Council representatives, and indeed last Friday I described some of those suggestions as bizarre. On the other hand, some of the unions, not many, but some, appear to have representatives who are equally bizarre in their suggestions that they can return to the salad days of the late 70s and early 80s during the height of the overheated boom. With those situations, Mr. Speaker, it is difficult to see that master agreement being achieved.
Speaker, to the Minister again. Does the Minister expect ratification of the memorandum by the parties on the weekend, and when does he expect that might take place?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure of the situation with the contractors group in this particular trade. The Boilermakers Union have a 21-day waiting period, which will take them to the end of the month before the ratification process. In view of what I just said about some of the people involved in the negotiating on behalf of the employers and on behalf of the Building Trades Council, I would hope that those parties will stay out of the situation with regard to the Boilermakers and not try to frustrate the memorandum of agreement that has been reached.
Additional supplementary, Edmonton Highlands.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The minister's just made a comment with respect to certain parties wanting to return to the salad days of the late 1970s. Since when is it the minister's responsibility or duties to get involved with negotiations by making editorial comments like that?
Exactly. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is inviting debate, and I shall resist that opportunity. On the other hand, I have to indicate that some of the requests put on the table by the employers' representatives, Construction Labour Relations Alberta, essentially would gut the agreements of many of the traditional aspects of the construction unionised segment and what has been traditionally in the collective agreements that have been negotiated. On the other hand, some of the unions have not recognised the economic realities and think that they can return to the wild days of the aspects that existed at the height of the boom. On both sides, they are being completely unrealistic, and I think the vast majority of Albertans would agree with my opinion.
Additional supplementaries? No additional supplementaries. Chair understands under points of order, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I guess it was last Friday, in discussing educational funding in question period, the Premier and I had a different interpretation of the facts dealing with educational funding by the province. And as pointed out to me by you, Mr. Speaker, that one of the things that was came out in Hansard that I acknowledge, it says, Mr. Martin, that's a lie. I would like to apologize for that and withdraw that term.
Chair appreciates the withdrawal by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and thanks him most sincerely. Are there additional points of order? Member for Edmonton Mill-Woods.
Mr. Speaker, point of order, Section 23I of Standing Orders. The Premier clearly imputed a false or unavowed motive to another member, being myself, and he clearly distorted and corrupted the whole intent of our position as regards the new campus of Grant MacEwan Community College. And let it be clear, our position is simply this, that we are glad to see capital enhancements to the infrastructure of the post-secondary college system of this province, but our simple concern is this, that this government doesn't fund them properly for operating expenses, and that's what we want. We don't want them to open up a new facility and then have, a year from there, a press conference being called by the college saying they can't run the programs.
The explanation of the honourable member has gone well beyond any point of order at all, and he's indulging in further debate. And Mr. Speaker, there have been, regrettably, I think that a number of persons in the Assembly, we all need to have regard to the concern about imputing motive. And Mr. Speaker, I think that question should be raised, but certainly not in the context in which it was raised in this instance.
Premier.
I can understand why the member is so defensive. That's right. And I'm glad that the other members representing Edmonton got hold of him and gave him a swat in the side of the head and say, stand up for the city.
That's it. Is it to be the Leader of the Opposition or Edmonton Highlands?
Why we have this type of feedback back and forth. Instead of the Premier admitting that he made a mistake, or at least being quiet, he has to get up. He has to get up and get the last word in. He's just like a kid at a toy store, Mr. Speaker. If he wants to keep acting that way, then we'll continue to have the problems in the House that he talks about all the time.
Honourable Premier, with due respect, our tradition, whether people wish to make comments in the House or not, but nevertheless, on points of order, our tradition is that we speak once to each point of order, rather than have them multiply back and forth. The Chair has looked at the initial blues that are here, and basically what